Billionaire Liam Hayes saved millions of lives, yet he couldn't outrun his own fate. When stage 4 cancer gave him a 6-month deadline, his billions, his awards, and his empire of humanitarian hope crumbled. Before dying, he turned his back on the world, except for one person. She was his quiet, unassuming maid, Clara Reed, the only soul who saw him as a man, not a myth. Liam asked her for his final wish. It wasn't for money, power, or fame. It was a demand that broke every moral and emotional rule Clara lived by. I want you to carry my child. His impossible request turned Clara into the reluctant bearer of a legacy far more precious than the billionaire's wealth, a man's final grasp at meaning. But could this act of mercy grant Liam's soul peace, or would it drag Clara into a scandal that would tear her entire world apart? This is chapter number 1. The fall from grace expanded, making the scene of Liam's collapse and diagnosis longer, more dramatic, and more internally focused on his guilt and realization. Chapter number 1. The fall from grace. The applause was a physical wall, a solid roar of adulation that vibrated in the glass walls of the Manhattan Tech Summit Auditorium. Liam Hayes stepped onto the stage, the culmination of a decade spent pioneering breakthroughs in oncology. He was the visionary CEO of Hayes Therapeutics, the man who had promised to render cancer history. His name was no longer just a brand. It was synonymous with hope. Cameras flashed like a continuous lightning storm. Thousands of faces, illuminated by the anticipation glowing on their screens, stared up at him. He smiled for the crowd, a practiced, calm expression, but inside, his voice seemed to echo from somewhere distant. Tonight, he was scheduled to announce the drug that could stop metastasis, a therapy that genuinely might redefine human survival. He stared at the teleprompter, and that's when the words began to blur. The bright, pristine script, his flawless future laid out in digital text, swam before his eyes. His hand, the same hand that had signed billion-dollar deals and secured life-saving patents, trembled, gripping the edge of the podium until his knuckles were white. The applause still roared, but in his head, the sound twisted, morphing into waves crashing over a sinking ship. He blinked, trying to snatch focus, but the stage lights seemed too brilliant, too white, reminding him of a sterile hospital ceiling. He could hear the faint, insistent click of a heartbeat monitor, a memory long buried. The faces in the audience melted into a terrifying haze. Then came the profound, sickening dizziness. The entire room tilted violently. The audience gasped as the man who had saved millions staggered forward. His microphone fell with a metallic, final thud. Liam collapsed to the floor, a tangle of wires and spilled artificial light. The live stream froze mid-frame, his descent captured forever before the clip flooded social media within minutes. The hashtag #BillionaireCollapse instantly trended #1 worldwide. The comments were a vicious mix. Some called it karma, others tragedy. A tweet went viral, sharp as a scalpel. The man who played God just met him. When Liam opened his eyes again, the world was blindingly, oppressively sterile white. A pulse monitor blinked a slow, monotonous rhythm beside his bit. The heavy, clinical smell of antiseptic filled his lungs, burning his throat when he tried to speak. A nurse whispered, "Mr. Hayes, you're at Mount Sinai Hospital. You had a seizure. The doctor will be here soon." He turned his head slowly, catching his reflection in the dark hospital window. City lights flickered across the glass, illuminating his once confident face, now pale and sunken, his eyes rimmed with an exhaustion deeper than any sleepless night. The door opened and Dr. Ruiz, crisp and professional, walked in, chart in hand. "Liam Hayes," she said softly, her tone clinically empathetic. "Stage 4 bone marrow cancer. You may have 6 months, maybe less." The words didn't shock him. They settled quietly, like stones sinking into deep, cold water. 6 months. There was no plea, no denial, no dramatic outburst, only a faint, crushing realization. All his billions, his empire of labs and patents, meant nothing against the silence waiting at the end. He simply nodded once, almost relieved that the exhausting race was finally over. Outside his room, The world continued its frantic debate. Reporters camped beneath the hospital entrance. A drone hovered, seeking footage of the fallen giant. CNN replayed the collapse clip in slow motion. CNBC debated the company's stock drop. Billionaire collapse had already turned into a cold, heartless meme. His PR manager texted nonstop, pleading for a statement, but Liam ignored them all. He looked out at the jagged skyline of Manhattan, glowing against the dark river, the city pulsing below like a circuit board lit by endless human ambition. But he felt utterly detached, as though he were already fading from it all. He thought of his younger brother, Daniel, the car accident, and the guilt that had consumed him, forging him into a man obsessed with saving lives, an empire built as an act of atonement. Somewhere along the way, he had traded genuine humanity for glossy headlines. When the nurse adjusted his foreline, she hesitated. "Sir, the press wants to know if you plan to continue the presentation." Liam let out a small, bitter laugh. "Tell them the show's over." His voice was raspy, hollow, but steady. He opened his phone, scrolling through the comments under the viral video, ignoring the notifications from board members. He found the one he couldn't forget. The man who promised to cure cancer can't even save his own heart. He read it twice, then whispered, "They're not wrong." He closed his eyes. The clock ticked past 3 a.m. He watched the city's lights flicker out one by one until only his own pale reflection remained, a hollowed man, framed by the faint glow of machines. He whispered to the glass, "This is what legacy feels like." Cold and quiet. For the first time in years, Liam Hayes felt small, stripped bare, and strangely free. He had spent a lifetime saving others, but now there was no one left to save. No one, perhaps, except himself. Great. You have chapter 1 completed. Here are the remaining 9 chapters of your story, continuing the narrative one by one, in English. Chapter number 2, The Haunted Penthouse. The penthouse looked like a glass museum, suspended high above Manhattan, cold, clean, and utterly untouched. Liam Hayes stood in the middle of it, still in the same expensive black suit he had worn on stage. His tie was undone, and the white plastic hospital wristband cut faintly into his skin. The elevator doors closed behind him, leaving a hollow echo that faded into silence. The city outside glittered with 1,000 windows, but inside, everything felt lifeless. Every step he took echoed against the marble floors, as if reminding him he was walking through a monument to himself. The walls were filled with polished awards, framed magazine covers, and photographs of him shaking hands with politicians. They no longer looked like triumphs, only ghosts. Clara Reed opened the door from the kitchen, startled to see him home so soon. "Mr. Hayes, you should be resting," she said softly. He didn't answer, just nodded, placing his briefcase on the counter and staring at it as if it belonged to someone else. Clara was 25, her brown hair tied in a loose bun, her uniform simple gray. She had been working there for only a year, but she was the only person who hadn't tried to flatter or exploit him. She treated him like a man, not a myth. That night, she moved quietly around him, preparing soup, turning down the lights, and closing the curtains while the TV murmured in the background. He sank into the leather couch, remote in hand, scrolling through channels until he froze. The screen showed his own collapse, replayed again and again. Analysts debated the stock drop. The banner read, "Billionaire Collapse Shocks Market." Trending number 1. The world that had once worshipped him now dissected him like a specimen. Clara set the bowl of soup beside him. He didn't touch it, just kept staring at the one pinned comment on the side of the screen. "The man who promised to cure cancer can't even save his own heart." He turned off the TV, leaving the apartment drenched in silence. The only light the cold blue glow reflected off the windows. "They are not wrong," he whispered, more to himself than to her. Clara hesitated, then spoke quietly. "You've saved lives, sir. You've built things that matter." He smiled without warmth. "I built things to feel like I mattered." She simply adjusted the blanket over his shoulders and left him alone. Later, he walked to the balcony barefoot. The skyline spread before him like an endless constellation. He felt strangely detached, as if he were already a ghost. Back inside, Clara returned quietly with a glass of water and his medication. "You should sleep," she said softly. "I will," he murmured, his voice calm. As she walked away, he whispered, "Thank you." She paused but said nothing and disappeared. Alone again, Liam lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the doctor's words. He remembered Daniel, his younger brother, before the silence that followed the crash. He had spent his life trying to resurrect that lost voice through medicine and money. Now, even his own heartbeat felt borrowed. He wandered through the penthouse the next day, pausing at the shelf of awards, Forbes Visionary, Humanitarian Medal. He picked one up and whispered, "I forgot how to be one." He finally walked into his dark study, staring at the photographs of clinical trials where patients were smiling. That evening, Clara brought him tea. "Is there anyone you'd like me to call? Family, friends?" she asked. "No one would answer even if I did call," he replied. She sighed. "Sometimes people surprise you, sir." He almost smiled at that. He stood by the piano, the grand instrument unplayed for years. He pressed one key gently. The note echoed long and lonely through the vast room. He whispered to himself, "I used to love the sound of life." The man who once cured others sat in the dark of his own making, and for the first time since his collapse, Liam Hayes admitted to himself that he was afraid. "Great. You have chapter 1 completed. Here are the remaining 9 chapters of your story, continuing the narrative one by one." In English, chapter number 2, The Haunted Penthouse. The penthouse looked like a glass museum, suspended high above Manhattan, cold, clean, and utterly untouched. Liam Hayes stood in the middle of it, still in the same expensive black suit he had worn on stage. His tie was undone, and the white plastic hospital wristband cut faintly into his skin. The elevator doors closed behind him, leaving a hollow echo that faded into silence. The city outside glittered with 1,000 windows, but inside, everything felt lifeless. Every step he took echoed against the marble floors, as if reminding him he was walking through a monument to himself. The walls were filled with polished awards, framed magazine covers, and photographs of him shaking hands with politicians. They no longer looked like triumphs, only ghosts. Clara Reed opened the door from the kitchen, startled to see him home so soon. "Mr. Hayes, you should be resting," she said softly. He didn't answer, just nodded, placing his briefcase on the counter and staring at it as if it belonged to someone else. Clara was 25, her brown hair tied in a loose bun, her uniform simple gray. She had been working there for only a year, but she was the only person who hadn't tried to flatter or exploit him. She treated him like a man, not a myth. That night, she moved quietly around him, preparing soup, turning down the lights, and closing the curtains while the TV murmured in the background. He sank into the leather couch, remote in hand, scrolling through channels until he froze. The screen showed his own collapse, replayed again and again. Analysts debated the stock drop. The banner read, "Billionaire Collapse Shocks Market." Trending number 1. The world that had once worshipped him now dissected him like a specimen. Clara set the bowl of soup beside him. He didn't touch it, just kept staring at the one pinned comment on the side of the screen. "The man who promised to cure cancer can't even save his own heart." He turned off the TV, leaving the apartment drenched in silence. The only light the cold blue glow reflected off the windows. "They are not wrong," he whispered, more to himself than to her. Clara hesitated, then spoke quietly. "You've saved lives, sir. You've built things that matter." He smiled without warmth. "I built things to feel like I mattered." She simply adjusted the blanket over his shoulders and left him alone. Later, he walked to the balcony barefoot. The skyline spread before him like an endless constellation. He felt strangely detached, as if he were already a ghost. Back inside, Clara returned quietly with a glass of water and his medication. "You should sleep," she said softly. "I will," he murmured, his voice calm. As she walked away, he whispered, "Thank you." She paused but said nothing and disappeared. Alone again, Liam lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the doctor's words. He remembered Daniel, his younger brother, before the silence that followed the crash. He had spent his life trying to resurrect that lost voice through medicine and money. Now, even his own heartbeat felt borrowed. He wandered through the penthouse the next day, pausing at the shelf of awards, Forbes Visionary, Humanitarian Medal. He picked one up and whispered, "I forgot how to be one." He finally walked into his dark study, staring at the photographs of clinical trials where patients were smiling. That evening, Clara brought him tea. "Is there anyone you'd like me to call? Family, friends?" she asked. "No one would answer even if I did call," he replied. She sighed. "Sometimes people surprise you, sir." He almost smiled at that. He stood by the piano, the grand instrument unplayed for years. He pressed one key gently. The note echoed long and lonely through the vast room. He whispered to himself, "I used to love the sound of life." The man who once cured others sat in the dark of his own making, and for the first time since his collapse, Liam Hayes admitted to himself that he was afraid. Chapter number 3. The Impossible Request. Morning sunlight cut through the blinds. Liam Hayes sat at the edge of his desk, the weight of sleepless hours heavy under his eyes. The silence was broken only by the soft hum of the city. He had made his decision. Clara Reed entered, carrying his morning coffee. She placed it down and turned to leave when his voice stopped her. "Clara, sit down, please." She hesitated, her hand stilling on the tray, but obeyed. She took a small step closer, her brow furrowed. He looked at her for a long time, studying her face, not as an employer, but as a man clinging to a final sense of truth. "You've been here how long?" he asked. "Almost a year," she replied softly. "You're the only one who doesn't talk about me when I'm not in the room." He managed a thin smile. "That's rare these days." He leaned back, exhaling slowly. "I don't have much time left, Clara." She blinked. "The doctor said 6 months, maybe less." Her lips parted in shock. "Sir, I'm sorry. I didn't know." He waved a hand, dismissing her sympathy. "I'm not telling you for pity. I'm telling you because I need you to understand what I'm about to ask." He stared at the floor for a long moment, then said quietly, "I don't want to die forgotten." "You won't be forgotten, Mr. Hayes. You built Hayes Therapeutics. You've saved millions of lives." He shook his head sharply. "They'll remember the company, not the man. They'll remember numbers, not the heartbeat behind them." His voice cracked for the first time in years. He looked up at her, his eyes steady. "I want a child. I want you to carry it. My last legacy." The words dropped between them like thunder. Clara froze, the tray clattering against the table. She stumbled back, her breath catching in her throat. "Sir, what?" She could barely form the words. "You heard me," he said softly. "I want to leave something alive before I go. Something more human than a building with my name on it." Clara's face flushed with confusion and disbelief. "That's not something I can just do," she stammered. I'm not married. I don't even." She trailed off, unable to speak. He nodded slowly. "I know what I'm asking. It's impossible, inappropriate, insane. But it's the only thing that makes sense now. I've spent my life saving others. Now I want something to remember me beyond the headlines." He rose from his chair, walking toward the window, his reflection fractured by the sunlight. "I don't want to buy this. I don't want to force it. I need to ask." He turned back to her, eyes weary but sincere. "I'm not asking for love, Clara. I'm asking for trust and the chance to make this life mean something." She felt her heart pounding, so loud it drowned the city noise behind them. The man before her looked smaller, broken, human. She swallowed, trying to steady herself. "I can't decide something like that right now." Her voice trembled. "Of course," he said quietly. "Take your time. I'll respect whatever answer you give." She stared at him, tears forming unbidden. "I always thought if I gave myself to someone, it would be for love, not for legacy." His gaze softened. "I'm asking you to help me leave a piece of hope in the world." Clara backed toward the door, her hand shaking. I need time to think. She turned and left quickly, her footsteps echoing down the marble hall. Chapter number 4. A choice born of compassion. In the hallway, Clara's niece nearly gave out. She gripped the wall, gasping for air. The weight of his request pressed into her chest, both terrifying and heartbreaking. She walked to her small room at the end of the corridor, sitting on the edge of her bed. Her reflection in the mirror looked pale, frightened, but not angry. She thought of her mother's final words before she died. The greatest kindness you can give is to carry someone else's pain. Clara breathed the words softly, letting them fill the silence. The city lights glowed blue against the storm clouds, casting reflections that shimmered like ghosts across the floor. She stood suddenly, unable to sit any longer, and walked down the long hallway, her bare feet silent on the marble. Each step was a decision she didn't fully understand. Downstairs, Liam sat in the dark study, staring at the closed door she had walked through. His heart felt heavier than ever. The penthouse that once symbolized control now felt like a tomb. He looked around at the glass walls, the perfect symmetry, the emptiness. None of it mattered anymore. He had spent years surrounded by people who wanted a piece of his empire. But she was the first person who looked at him and saw a man, not a miracle. He whispered into the quiet. Please say yes, Clara. Just one night, one piece of me left in this world, something to outlive me. Upstairs, Clara wiped her tears and looked toward the ceiling, as if she could feel his voice traveling through it. Her chest tightened with emotions she couldn't name. Pity, empathy, fear, perhaps all of them. She thought about what it meant to give life, to carry a legacy that wasn't hers, but could mean redemption for someone else. She didn't know if it was right or wrong, only that it felt deeply human. She lay back on her bed, eyes open, wondering if love always had to start with choice, or if sometimes it began with compassion. Outside the window, the sky darkened to a bruised shade of blue, the same color as the Hayes Company logo, the same blue that would soon define the story of two people caught between mortality and mercy. In that silence, the same thought echoed through the night. Is kindness enough to save what's left of us? Chapter number 5. The surrender. Rain began to fall that night, steady and cold, drumming against the glass walls of the penthouse. Clara walked down the long hallway, her hand hovering over his door for a moment. Then she pushed it open without knocking. Liam was at his desk, staring at a blank page on his laptop. The screen's glow painted his face in a cold white light. When he saw her, he froze. Clara, he said her name slowly, as if afraid it might disappear. She took a deep breath, her voice barely audible. If this helps you leave in peace, I'll do it. But not for your name, for your soul. He stared at her for a long moment, unable to speak. The air between them thickened with everything unspoken. Gratitude, fear, reverence. He rose from the chair slowly, his movements uncertain, like a man learning how to exist again. He stepped closer, the sound of rain filling the spaces their words couldn't reach. His eyes softened, not with desire, but with disbelief that she was real, that someone could still choose to stay near him. You don't have to, he whispered. I know, she said, but maybe I need to. She took another step, and the room seemed to shrink around them. The light from the city slipped through the window, bathing them both in a muted hue of forgiveness. Blue, the color that once defined his company, and now defined something far deeper. Her hand lifted, trembling, as she touched his arm. He closed his eyes at the contact, his breath catching as if it had been years since anyone had reached for him like this. When he looked at her again, his voice cracked. You're not saving me, Clara. You're giving me a reason to go softly. She didn't answer, only nodded once, tears glinting in her eyes. Thunder rolled faintly over the skyline. He reached out, brushing a strand of her hair away from her face, his fingers lingering a moment longer than necessary. She stepped closer until she could feel his heartbeat, slow and uneven, against her chest. Her breath trembled as she whispered, I'm afraid. He smiled a small, broken smile. So am I. Their foreheads touched for a single suspended second before his lips met hers. It wasn't hunger. It was surrender. the kind of kiss that felt more like a prayer than passion. His hand rested against her cheek, thumb brushing away the tear that had fallen between them. Chapter number 6. Confessions in the Quiet. Later, the world seemed to fade into a profound quiet. The storm softened to a whisper as they sat together on the edge of the bed, fingers intertwined. He looked at her as if memorizing the shape of her face. Every blink was a moment he couldn't afford to lose. She met his gaze not as a servant, but as a witness to his final act of faith. They spoke little, only in fragments. He told her about Daniel, his brother, about the crash, and how guilt had driven him to build the company, to try and play God so he could forget how powerless he had once been. She listened without judgment, her thumb tracing circles against his palm. When he faltered, she whispered softly, "You've spent your life saving others. Maybe this time, let someone save you." He closed his eyes, tears threatening, but never falling. "I don't deserve that. None of us do," she said. "But that's what makes it mercy." He opened his eyes again, the reflection of blue light glimmering across her face. In that moment, he saw not a maid, not pity, but something pure, something that made his chest ache in ways no disease could. "I thought I understood the science of life," he said quietly. "But you just taught me what it means to live." She leaned in, pressing her forehead to his. "I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but tonight, I'm here. That's all we have." He nodded once, eyes glistening. Then they let the silence fill what words could not. The night stretched around them, slow and infinite. Rain tapped softly against the glass, and somewhere beneath it all, a city of millions continued breathing, unaware of the small, fragile miracle unfolding high above. When she finally closed her eyes against his shoulder, she could feel his heartbeat, a faint rhythm, steady, but fading. When he whispered her name again, it was softer than the rain. "Thank you, Clara, for reminding me that even at the end, there can still be grace." Chapter number 7. The Last Legacy and Testament. Morning came pale and quiet. The rain had stopped, but its scent still clung to the air. The penthouse felt different, somehow softer, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the tenderness of the night. Liam Hayes sat by the window, wrapped in a blanket, the skyline hazy beyond the glass. He looked fragile and human. Clara entered silently, carrying a tray with tea. He glanced at her, the faintest smile touching his lips. "You didn't have to stay," she replied softly. "I didn't know how to leave." He looked out the window again. "The doctors called this remission," he said, almost laughing. "But I think it's just a pause, a chance to say goodbye right this time." Clara sat opposite him. "You don't have to say goodbye, not yet." He looked at her for a long moment. "I've spent my whole life saying goodbye to people. Daniel, my parents, my own health. Maybe it's time I stop pretending I can outrun it." That afternoon, he asked her to sit with him in the study. She noticed one envelope on the desk sealed with his signature. "What's that?" she asked. He tapped the paper with the tip of his pen. "My will," he said simply. "You're in it." She froze, her eyes widening. "What do you mean, Liam?" "You can't," he interrupted quietly. "It's not about money, Clara. It's about trust. I've named you as guardian of the child, if it exists. I want that part of me to have someone who sees the world like you do, not like me." Her throat tightened. She wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. He looked at her again, his voice low and certain. "This isn't charity. It's gratitude. You gave me peace when the rest of the world gave me noise." Liam reached across the table, taking her hand, his skin cold but steady. "Promise me something," he said. "When I'm gone, you live. Don't let this house, this name, this disease become your shadow." She shook her head, whispering, "I don't know if I can. I've never been good at letting go." He smiled faintly. "Neither have I. But that's how we start over, isn't it?" Chapter number 8. The Final Notes. As the days passed, his strength waned. Each morning became slower, every breath a little heavier. Clara adjusted her hours, staying near his side, reading aloud from books he used to quote when he was younger. Sometimes he would talk about his brother again, describing the way Daniel used to race him to the river or the day he built his first microscope in their garage. He told her how he had become obsessed with control because chaos had stolen everything from him. She listened carefully, knowing these confessions were more important than medicine. In the evenings, she played soft music on the piano. The sound drifted through the halls, gentle and sad. One night, as the city lights flickered blue against the windows, he whispered, "Play the song that sounds like forgiveness." She pressed the keys slowly, each note trembling like a breath. When she finished, he exhaled softly. "That's what I wanted," he murmured. Not applause, not legacy, just that feeling of quiet clarity. Days later, he didn't leave his bed. The doctor visited daily, but there was little to do. Machines around him hummed steady, but the rhythm of his heartbeat told a different story. Clara stayed by him, reading from his notebook, the one he had written during his hospital stay. "Find the meaning," she read aloud. He smiled faintly. "Maybe you already did." Chapter number 9. The Final Breath. The sun began to set, painting the room in a golden haze that slowly shifted into the pale blue light that had followed them since the beginning. Blue for redemption, light for forgiveness. He looked at her one last time, his voice a whisper. "Promise me you'll live, find light again." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I will," she said through the tremor in her voice. He smiled softly. "Thank you for staying." He exhaled once, and the line of his chest stilled. The room filled with stillness, but it wasn't empty. The last rays of sunset bathed everything in a soft white glow, as if the world itself paused to honor him. She pressed her forehead to his hand, whispering through her sobs, "You're free now, Liam." The machines beeped once, then fell silent. And in that silence, light flooded the room, as though forgiveness itself had taken form, wrapping around both of them until everything was white. Chapter number 10. The Airbearer. 2 weeks passed since Liam's death, and the world had already moved on. The stock market had steadied. Hayes Therapeutics released a polished statement honoring its founder, and the media recycled his story into another corporate legend. Clara remained in the penthouse only because she couldn't yet bring herself to leave. One morning, she woke dizzy, the sunlight too bright. Her hands trembled as she reached for the calendar, counting backwards, her breath quickening when the truth struck. She was late, very late. The next hour blurred together. Pharmacy, test, silence. Then she saw the two pink lines, sharp, undeniable. She sank to the floor, pressing her hand to her stomach. "You're his," she whispered. "You're my reason now." Tears fell freely, but they weren't only grief. They were that fragile peace didn't last. 3 days later, the world learned before she could even tell anyone. It began with a headline on a gossip site, "The maid who claims to be the billionaire's heir-bearer." Within hours, it was everywhere. CNN, TMZ, and every online tabloid. The hashtag #TheBillionaireIsMade trended at #1 again. This time, not for tragedy, but for scandal. Photographs of Clara leaving a clinic, her pale face caught by paparazzi lens, went viral. Threads erupted on Reddit. Debates flooded TikTok. Gold digger or miracle? The company issued a cold statement denying any knowledge of unverified personal matters concerning the late Mr. Hayes. The comments were brutal. Someone tweeted, "She's cashing in on grief." Her heart raced every time the elevator chimed. At night, she could see flashes from cameras outside the windows, like lightning without thunder. Her world shrank to the size of one dimly lit apartment. She packed a small bag, intending to leave. On the fourth night, she sat by the window, staring at the skyline again. She placed her hand on her stomach and whispered through tears, "I'm sorry. I never wanted this." The intercom buzzed sharply. She froze, ignoring it, but it buzzed again, and a voice came through, calm, certain. "Clara, it's Michael Grant. I'm Liam's attorney. Please open the door."